Are you considering launching your own podcast? Well, my guest today and I may have differing opinions on whether or not you should, and we're going to give you the pros and cons of starting your own podcast in 2026. I'm Kandas Rodarte. This is Gratitude Geek, and today we are talking to Julie Marty-Pearson. Hi, Julie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So give the audience some insight onto why you are the perfect person to have this conversation about whether or not we should start a podcast in 2026.
Oh, yes, because I get asked that question all the time. But I'm a good person to ask because that's what I do. I help people start podcasts. I am someone who has been in podcasting almost 5 years, and it really shifted not only my life, but my business. And so now a lot of what I do is have these conversations. Is a podcast right for you? Is a podcast right for your business? Is podcasting something you should be tapping into as a guest or a sponsor? So yeah, I have this conversation with myself in my head as well as with potential clients and my own podcast listeners every day.
All right, Julie, how do you weave gratitude into your business strategy?
I try my best to shout out the people that have helped me get here. And sometimes that is me posting and tagging someone who is my podcast mentor 4 or 5 years ago, or was the group I joined that now how I do my group because of them. I also love to shout out people who've had me on their podcast, who have reached out to me when they can tell I'm struggling or not showing up like I usually do, who the people who say yes instantly to being a speaker in my membership or in my community. And so for me, it is reminding myself to say thank you to the people, especially to the women who have supported me along the way. And so I try to go back and reshare episodes I've been on to support their podcast, to support their community, whatever it is. And I'm not always on top of it. And sometimes it's a few weeks or months late, but that is something I'm going back to really say, like, thank you. You guys gave me this platform, gave me this intro, gave me this collaboration. And so even though I don't hang out maybe on social as much as I used to, the time I do is me remembering to do that and to say thank you and to say, hey, follow these women, because if you're not, you should be.
I have called myself the Gratitude Geek since 2012. And in that time, I have learned that the thank you comes at just the right time. I was listening to one of your episodes this morning of Podcast Your Story, and I love the premise of the show because you interview people about why they have a podcast and the importance of sharing your story in the podcast format. So I started podcasting in 2014, and a lot has changed in the past 12 years. And back in the day when we started, there might have been 300,000 podcasts out there, and people would start a podcast, make it to 3 episodes, and go, "Oh my God, this is so much work." And I still think that people start podcasts, get to 3 episodes, and go, "Oh my God, this is so much work." And it's way more expensive now than it was. Like back when I started, it was not as fancy as it is now. And I spend a lot more money on my podcast today than I did in 2014, let me tell you. And then I've recently, I've gone off the rails already. We aren't even 5 minutes into the interview, and I've already gone off the rails. But I also recently discovered that someone that I know professionally, a colleague of mine, has transformed her show, and now she's having it professionally produced inside a recording studio, and the recording studio charges $275 an hour. And I'm like, the money is not being made by the podcasters. It's being made by the tertiaries that provide services to the podcasters. Anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I meet people sometimes who say like, "Oh, I did a program to start one," or "I'm in one," and then they'll say something about how much they paid, and I'll be like, "I'm sorry, why would you pay that much money to start a podcast? You realize it could be years before you see any of it back." Like, that's what I've had people tell me. They've spent thousands getting it set up and launched, and it just gives me a deep pain for them, because I think people can be so easily misled as to why they need a podcast and what they need to get started.
And there's the question: why do you need your own podcast hosted by you?
That's a very good question. So here's the thing. Part of it is, what do you do? What is your business? Who are you trying to connect with? Where is it not working? I think a lot of people are going to podcasts because social media is hard. Like, a lot of us don't like hanging out there anymore because it's just too much negative and political. Some of us just feel like we're talking and posting and there's no engagement. There's no leaving the platform. So we're not getting anywhere, like with our email list or whatever it may be. And I think because we see so many people podcasting, well, it can't be that hard, is kind of what I think people think. And yes, it isn't hard in some ways. But I just went through a 6-week program that I had 4 people go through to start their podcast. None of them have officially launched because I think none of them realized all of the work, all of the little decisions and pieces and things you have to do to even be ready to tell people you're launching a podcast. And so obviously, yes, I want business. I want people to hire me. I want people to work with me. But I would never make someone do it if I can tell they're not in the right space for it. If I can tell they do not have the bandwidth for it or the support or the ability. Yes, they could probably get launched, but can they keep doing it after that?
12 years into my show, and I hate my cover art. It's always something, right? The color schemes, things evolve. You look at I look at some of my cover art or for some of my thumbnails from 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm like, oh, why did I change? Those are so much better than what I'm doing now. Why do I keep changing?
Well, and it's funny because one of the things I always say to people is the great thing about podcasting is you're not stuck. You can change at any time. You can change the name and the cover and the this and then that. But that's also the hard part. Yeah. Because then you could start to change, but you're like, you get lost in the changes. And wait, what was I trying to do here? Or I go down rabbit holes with Canva and creating new art, and there's a lot of things to distract you.
Yeah.
But I will say the why is where I always start with people. That's like a question I ask. Why do you want a podcast? Why do you want to start a podcast? Why do you think you should start a podcast? And a lot of people will say, well, everyone has one, or shouldn't I? Because that's what everyone's doing. And those are not good reasons.
No.
Because no. But you also have to dig deep into that why. Is it you see a podcast as a way of growing your business and making more money? But do you know how to do that?
Yeah. And do you know how to do that is the big question. Because just because you launch a podcast doesn't mean you're going to get a brand deal.
Right.
Speaking of brand deals, this episode of Gratitude Geek is brought to you by HoneyBook. I use HoneyBook.
That was really good.
I have been using HoneyBook for 5 or 6 years now to do the project management for my podcast. I wouldn't be able to survive without it. HoneyBook is not a podcast project management tool. It is a project management tool, but it works brilliantly for my podcast. So I am super excited that they are a sponsor of the show. Thank you, HoneyBook. Link in the show notes.
I love that. I love that because I've never even heard of it. And I'm like, ooh. I love any kind of tool where I can get organized, even if I don't use it consistently.
When you filled out your intake form and scheduled yourself on my calendar, that was all HoneyBook. And all the emails that you got, everything came through HoneyBook. It's a great, it's a CRM. And, photographers and people like that tend to use it more. But I have found it to be a perfect tool for the podcast. And I haven't given it a shout out in quite some time. And they've been the show sponsor for many, many years. So thank you, HoneyBook.
I love that. But that's such a good segue or insertion, because that is one of the big things I talk to people about is if it's really right for you, you've got to set up the processes from day one, because a lot of us did it and now it's just kind of here, there, and all over the place. And yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to set yourself up for success with systems and things like that. But no matter what, if you can't answer the why clearly, none of that's going to matter because, and that doesn't mean you can't start a podcast without a clear vision of what it's going to do. But you have to answer that question before you invest time and money into starting one.
So the a con is, do you have the time and money to invest? And it is today in 2026, it is not the same as it was in 2014. 2014, I launched with a Zoom account and a Libsyn account. And I think that I did have a mixer and a microphone, so I probably spent $500 or $600 on equipment. Oh, and I had a little Zoom recorder. Do you remember Zoom recorders? That's how I recorded my audio on a little recording device, and then I had this little card that I would. Anyway, long story short, I launched the show for less than $1,000. I don't think that's possible today. I really don't. With the equipment that you need, I mean, headphones, microphone, boom arm, mixer. If you have if you really want good sound, or some sort of audio to computer tool. I don't know all the proper words because I'm a geek, but I'm not that much of a geek that I know all these names. But I mean, and then you hire somebody to help you, hosting, advertising. I mean, it's going to cost you more than $1,000 to launch.
I would disagree with that, only because I actually do a workshop on how to start a podcast on a budget. For me, when I started, I used Zoom. I had a $30 mic. I didn't edit. I was using free hosting services. So I actually started fairly cheaply, but it was also a big learning curve for me because it was new. And, I've learned, yes, spend some money on a mic because that is your most important tool. But I also see there's a lot of options now, even with Riverside. Riverside now, you can host, you can record, you can live stream, you can edit all in one place. So there are ways to save money, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't invest money and time into launching if that's really what you want to do, because there are ways to spend a little and make a big impact with your podcast, I guess is my framing of that.
And you and I both have the same $79 Samsung Q2U microphone.
Right.
So,
although it's like $99 now.
Oh, is it?
I priced them recently for my workshop, and I'm like, oh, I didn't pay that much.
Yeah, the price has gone up.
But I still think, it's a great mic. You could use it in a lot of different ways and all of that. You can even plug it into my phone if I wanted to, because of, if I had a converter. But I think I keep going back to the why. It's because the why can be a lot of things, but you have to pick a focus. And so I say that being like, yes, I started my second podcast, so it would tie into my business, which is Podcast Your Story, which is me helping people podcast, becoming guests. But I originally launched with no clear plan. So what happened was, after 6 episodes, I paused it because I realized I wasn't sure yet what my business really was. And so how could I start putting content out without a clear plan? And so I always share that with people because it's okay to do it and realize, oh, I got to take a step back. I really wasn't clear. And, when I started it, it really was about increasing my visibility, getting more people to know who I am and getting people to listen. Whereas now it's more of a tool of getting people into funnel, getting people to my events, or getting people on my email list, right? But that's because I have a clear idea of what my offers are, what I help people with versus back then. Does it mean I couldn't do both with the same podcast? Of course, more people know me, people listen, all those things. But I think sometimes we have all of these, it can help me get more, speaking gigs. It can help me find collaborations. I can have guests on, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we can do all those things, but what is your focus? What's your main purpose? What do you want out of it? And I often see people, it's leads or it's increased business, but they're not realistic about how long it will take for that to actually happen.
I started my show to promote a greeting card business that I was involved in, that I still use. Every month I send thank you cards and birthday cards every month with using this service that I was promoting back then. And I still wholeheartedly endorse it. But the show evolved over time because I was having more fun having those interesting conversations with fascinating people about topics that were just so intriguing, right? But they all centered around marketing, relationship building, money mindset, things that me as a woman in my 40s at the time, and now I'm in my 50s, wanted to talk about. I mean, I had been a business owner at that point for 20 years. Now it's almost 30 years. And, these are all conversations that I just wanted to be having, and they didn't really have anything to do with a business. So it really wasn't until recently that I combined my business offering with my podcast. So now I've created a community for podcast listeners, Gen X women who are solopreneurs. You're welcome to join the lab. It's a wonderful place for Gen X women who own their own business to gather and support each other and get ideas, experiment, iterate, learn. It's wonderful. Great group of women in that community. But I didn't really know to do that until about 4 months ago. So even someone who, I am a veteran podcaster who has I've interviewed Alan Dibb and the director of the Vatican Observatory and, so many really big, the big name people. I've had those people on my show without even really knowing where I was going with the show. I just wanted to have really interesting conversations. And I happen to be a connector, and I have the ability to connect people, but I didn't know where I was going with the show 12 years into it.
Right. So. And I think that some of us start without knowing. Like, I started my first podcast, which I still have, The Story of My Pet, and it was just like, let's try this out. What is podcasting? Do I like it? How do I do it? How can I do it? All these things. And it grew slowly, and I still love doing it, but it kind of gets put on the side. But like you, that podcast, what I love about it are the interviews. Mm-hmm. And it's predominantly interviews because I get to just sit down and meet these awesome people who are doing things all over the world to help animals. And, there's a connectiveness to anyone who is an animal lover or a fur mom or whatever you call yourself. And I love it. But what I don't love is all the work it gets to get those episodes out. And I need to do more of it. But, we only have so much time. And so, I keep that going because it's something I'm passionate about. And I know that it helps spread awareness and education. And the one thing I've been able to do now that I've had it out a while, even though I'm not consistently always putting out new content, is get sponsors. And a lot of those sponsors are people that I met through the podcast that I interviewed a couple of years ago, and they have small businesses and they need promotion. And so same with me. I didn't see that happening early on, but it's been the evolution of the podcast for me.
Yeah. And it seems to me like The Story of My Pet would be the perfect show for something like an SPCA or an animal rescue to partner with, mm-hmm. because it can be the vehicle for both of you.
Right.
There's a lot of possibilities there. And I'm sorry I haven't listened to that show. I've only listened to the Podcast Your Story show. Although I do love my animals.
And I always use it as an example of something where I did not start with the intent of really seeing it as it was making my business money. But at the time I was doing career coaching, and I could just never get anywhere with a podcast about career coaching because it didn't excite me. I didn't like, oh, yay, let's talk about resumes. Like, no. Talk about cats, kittens, puppies, let's go any day of the week. But I also my career was in education, and my education is in psychology. So I was taught undergrad how to run focus groups, how to do interviews from a research perspective. So the interview part of this is what I love. I could do it every day, all day long. It's all the other stuff that I have to sit down and force myself to do, the production and the promotion and the scheduling and all of that. The interview part is what I love, and it's easy for me. The solos are harder for me. And so I think that's why my second podcast was harder, because it had to be more me than me just interviewing people.
I do not like doing solo episodes. I rarely do solo episodes. Please don't ask me to do a solo episode. I don't want to do it. You are an excellent interviewer, though. So when I consider what we're doing here a conversation. I'm not. Right. I don't consider myself an interviewer. I consider myself a conversationalist. You are an interviewer, and there is a difference. And I'm not saying that either of us are a better format.
Better or worse,
I'm
right.
saying that we have different formats. You are excellent at it. You ask the right question at just the right time, and you get great answers out of your guests. So kudos.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Again, it's my researcher head. It's that. And it's funny because I also have to like give a shout out to my teachers in college. They noticed I already did it naturally, and they helped me grow the skill of listening and paraphrasing. And one of the things, I was going to be a therapist and then I ended up not doing it, but it's hard for people to listen to someone and reframe it and say it in words that not only you're explaining it to yourself, but you're explaining it to the person who just said it. And that is not something that people know how to do naturally sometimes. And trust me, I've had some bad interviews where I felt like I was pulling words out of them. I've also realized that just because someone is a good writer or author does not mean they're a good interviewee.
Yeah.
So, a lot of that I love to do, but does my interview skills equate to business or me finding leads? Not always, because sometimes I have to step back and realize I have to talk about what I do and how I help people versus just like the story and the process and all the great things we can talk about. And I think that's where I've had issue with my podcast is it is for my business. I want it to be more of a direct funnel to my business, but I also get to talk to these cool women, and I want to talk about other things than just podcasting. So that's why I've kind of separated into two podcasts now, because I want to talk about, women's health and mental health.
Oh, wait, hold on. Hold the phone. You have 3 podcasts?
Yes, now I have 3.
Okay. I'm barely getting by with 2. All right. Okay. Break it down. What are the 3 podcasts?
Okay, so the first is The Story of My Pet, which I started in 2021. And that podcast is all about advocating and educating for animal rescue, fostering, and adoption. My second is Podcast Your Story, which is directly linked to my business, which is Podcast Your Story. And that podcast is specifically about amplifying women's voices in podcasting. So it includes me interviewing women podcasters, but it also shares me giving tips and how-tos of other women to get into podcasting. And then my third podcast, which I just started, is called Still Becoming Women Unmuted. So this is more current events, women's issues, women's rights. I'm doing panels right now. I did one on healthcare access, one on women with chronic illness, which I am someone who's battled chronic illness since I was a kid. I'm also doing ones on things like, women and mental health, child-free women and cultural stereotypes and what we deal with as child-free women, which I also am. So I have some interviews I've done where we talk about why they started a podcast and how it's changed their life. But then we also talk about important topics like divorce and mental health and all these other things. And so it's kind of like me taking those into 2 places, because some people are only looking for one, not podcasting and women's issues. So again, for me, I've just kind of played with what it feels right and how I feel like I have to separate or put together. And I probably made a lot more work for myself, and I don't know that I'll be able to sustain all 3 moving forward. But for me, it was a lot of responding to what I was feeling I wanted to talk about and what I felt like wasn't right to put on my podcast. It really is for my business.
The whole thing with the panels, I have had a couple of panel interviews or panel episodes, and the feedback has always been fantastic, that people really love listening to them. They like to hear the voices of different people about the same topic. And I've been on panels, and they've always been, well, you and I were recently on a panel with Amy Stone where we talked about podcast awards. I'll link to that in the show notes. And because we had 3 different opinions about podcast awards.
And I think some of us changed our tune as we talked about it. Like, oh yeah, I guess that's true. Well,
and that's the nice thing about being a woman. And when you're which is why your unmuted podcast is important. when we are in a room with a man, we automatically, not all of us, but most women lower their voice, lower their tone, diminish their sparkle. But when we're together, in just women, there is so much we can accomplish. I swear, if we had a government of all women, this is totally off topic, y'all, but if we had a government of only women, imagine what we'd get done.
Oh my God. If the matriarchy just took over, we would, and it's a lot of what we're dealing with in the US is if people had just voted for the woman, how much different would our world be right now, right? And maybe it was our whole world wasn't ready for it. I don't know. But I think what you do is important too, because you were talking about Gen X women and Gen X women having a space. And I am a Gen X. I was born in 77, so I'm kind of towards the cusp of what people, depends on who you talk to. But I think as Gen X women, we are all hitting this point in our life right now that we're all like 45 to 60 now. And we all have or are going through menopause, and our bodies have changed that we were never prepared for because our moms didn't talk to us about it enough.
Exactly.
And so we're all getting to that point of having no F's left to give.
Yeah.
And I heard someone explain it before. I think it was Taraji P. Henson. I want to say that's who, it was a clip I heard her say that what she's realized is as women, we're given so many F's to give throughout our life. And we get to 50 is when we typically run out. But that also happens to be when we are in menopause and all these other things. And so I think Gen X as a community, we have no F's left to give. We don't care about being the good girl or the quiet one. So
possibly we have the same number of F's as we have eggs.
Yes,
and when we run out of eggs, that's all of our F's. Our F's are done.
But I also think as podcasters, we've realized that we own our power and we get to talk about whatever we want. And if people don't like it, don't listen.
Yeah.
But it's also this idea that I've been through things in my life that, God, I wish I had another woman who had experienced it to talk to before I did that, like having a hysterectomy.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh,
and
I feel the same way about my mastectomy. I really wish that I had known all the facts because I would have made different choices. But,
or at least I would have mentally prepared myself more.
Yeah.
Of what, I think there's so many ways that we could help each other just by sharing.
Yeah.
Because it's like, why don't we talk about these things that we're all experiencing, but we're all pretending like we aren't?
But I think that is the beauty of women who were teenagers in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Because that was a very special time to be a teenager. It was... We had CDs came out, things started to get digital. By the time we were 25-ish, we had internet-ish, I think that was like 95, we had internet-ish, we were the perfect generation to be the change agents. Gen X women are the change agents. What we decide to do is what's going to take the world into the future. And if we decide now is the time to shut up, but if we decide now is the time to use our voices, different outcomes.
And it's funny because now as you're talking about it, I'm thinking of all the women podcasters I know, and I think we're all Gen Xers. Like I know a few people that are under like 35, and then of course I know baby boomers who are also podcasters, but there are a lot of Gen X women who are podcasters.
There are,
and there's a reason.
And in my group in the lab, there are women who are not in the right age. The 65 to 80 is Gen X, right? There are women that were born before that or after that who are in that group, who say, well, I'm not Gen X. And I'm like, you're Gen X adjacent. Because we open our arms and let you in, right? We don't exclude anybody. We let right. I have events that say women only, and if men show up, I don't care. Right? Because,
right.
Who am I? If you're man enough to say, I want to go to this event and be the only man in the room, who am I to say no?
Right. And I'm the same way. Everything I do in my promotion and my podcast, it is really geared toward women. But I had a guy come to one of my workshops and he's like, well, I really want to do your program, but is it okay if I join? And I was like, of course, because him and I vibe. We think similarly, like him and I really work well together. And I said, but of course, I will ask the other women who have joined, and they were fine with it. But because not everything says women, but that's who I know I speak to. And I think as Gen X women, we speak to each other. Like it's different. That doesn't mean we can't help men and they can't be a part of it. But like you were talking about earlier, it's different to have space where it's just women. And so one of the things I did early in my business when I shifted to podcasting was create a networking space that I host that is called the Women's Podcaster Party. And the reason I created it is because I was seeing it was lacking. There wasn't space for just women. And I realized that as women, we podcast differently. We podcast about things differently. We often talk about some of the same topics that aren't really covered on men's shows. And I wanted a space for any woman to come in and be able to ask the question she felt like. I don't want someone to think this is a stupid question, or, I don't want to seem dumb or ask inappropriate things. And it's like, it's finding your people in the place to grow.
There's never a stupid question. Ever.
Because we all started out not knowing.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about some more cons about starting your own podcast. Now,
Yes.
I'm gonna, because we're on the topic of feeling comfortable in the space that we're in, I have another show called Sci-Fi Book Pod where my husband and I talk to someone about a book, a science fiction book. The guest picks a book and then we read it and discuss it on the show. And I get I get trolled in the comments on those episodes. I do. The men never get trolled, only me. And, things, and on my main channel, I also have men leaving comments about the way I look, the way I talk, yada, 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 right? So if you want to start your own podcast and you are a woman, you need to be prepared to have that happen because it will.
Absolutely. I think there is something about women, and you're going to get comments or things from both women and men that they just think they get to, talk about your appearance, talk about the way you talk about things, and you shouldn't have said that, and why can't you just do this or not that? Like so much of that I did not anticipate it. And I don't think I got a lot of it early on because pets, like people don't get upset about talking about pets. It can get combative when we talk about, I'm very clearly someone who says, please don't buy from breeders. There are too many healthy animals being put to sleep in our country every day. But I'm also not going to be like, oh, I can't be your friend because you once bought a dog. Like, look, we all learn. We all know what we know and don't know what we don't know. But I think that is such an important thing and I do think some women are afraid of that and I see that as a hindrance of why they don't even think about starting a podcast. Is like, I can't put myself out in that way. I don't want people to know me this well and have license to think they can comment on everything I say. So that is definitely a con. If you're not preparing yourself for that aspect, you're going to get unwanted attention, unwanted feedback. And sometimes I'll get a review and it's like, well, why was I a 4 instead of a 5? Like there's no, then I take it personally. Well, what did I do wrong? What wasn't I doing? What did I do they didn't like? Like, no, you're not going to be everybody's cup of tea, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
and you
have to be prepared
for that. You can't be a 5 for everybody because 5 Michelin stars. If you are a 1-star Michelin restaurant, you are better than anybody else. And if somebody took the time to actually leave a review, how many reviews do you leave? Honestly, I don't leave
Not
a lot of
much.
reviews. Yeah. So if somebody actually took the time to leave a review, that means something. Even if it was a 3, right? If they leave a 1, they're a jerk, right? They're a jerk. But a 3 means average. And I'd rather be average than be 0.
That's very true. And I think one of the reasons I bring that up is for me, I'm a Virgo. I am,
that explains
recovering
everything.
people. Recovering people pleaser. It's funny because people who only know me in this space don't see me as someone who's quiet or timid, but that can be my personality. I'm an introvert. I've always been slow to warm up to people. And so there is this kind of weird disconnect between how some people see me and some people see me here. But I think part of it for me, podcasting has given me license to say what I'm feeling and to say whatever I want and not care. So it's given me some of the power that I allowed to be taken from me. And in my old job, yes, you could be political, or yes, you could stand up, but it was also very political in higher education. There's, it's very much like corporate in a lot of ways. And sometimes you had to keep your mouth shut because you knew that the president or whoever felt a different way and you didn't want to lose your job. Yeah. And so for me, coming into my own business, but also podcasting, was so freeing to be like, right, I'm not everyone's cup of tea. Not everyone's going to like me. Not everyone's going to agree with me. Who cares?
Yeah, that's okay.
There are people out there that need to hear it. And so, yes, it is a con that you have to prepare yourself for the negative, but you also have to give up some of that. Like, it doesn't matter. You're putting yourself out there for the people that need to hear it.
Okay, so your business is helping people launch a podcast. And I am famous for saying, you don't need to have a podcast, just be a podcast guest. If you have the right strategy. So right. I also know that you coach podcast guests. So talk about the advantages of being a guest instead of launching your own show.
Yeah, and I will always tell people if they come to me and say, I want a podcast, I will ask, have you been a guest? No, not yet. Well, you need to go do that and then come back and talk to me. Yeah. Because guesting is going to get you an inside look of how this happens, what it looks like, and also the fact that everybody does it a little bit differently, and you have to prepare yourself for that. So don't
just be a guest, though. Listen to the episode to hear yourself. Yeah.
First, do not pitch yourself to someone who you haven't listened to their podcast. I mean, when I say that, I feel stupid, like, duh, but no, not duh, because a lot of people do. I have people reach out to me every day, DMs, emails, through my website. Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'd love to be on the story of my pet. Here's 10 reasons why I'm a great person. And I read it. Did you read the name of my podcast? Or I can tell you didn't listen to it because you're pitching me this guy who's great at marketing and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, no, I don't talk about that on this podcast. And so being a guest is a really great strategy. I think I lost count at the end. I need to go back and look based on when they were released, but I did something like 28 guest episodes on other people's podcasts last year.
Wow.
And part of that was me testing tools that I wanted to make sure these work before I tell people to use them. And it was also me realizing that I can learn a lot by being guests and seeing what hosts do, what I like, what I don't like. And I've gotten some great things that I've learned to do for my shows. I've also done some things like I will never do that to my guests. That was not cool, whatever it is. So guesting is a great way to get started in podcasting. But for some people, guesting is all you need because it is visibility boosting. It is showing your expertise. When you're a guest on someone's shows, like right now, Kandas is having me on it as a guest. She's telling her listeners that Julie's legit. I like her. I think people should learn about her. I agree with some of what she's saying. Being on as a guest, your host is legitimizing you as someone who knows what they're talking about, whatever it is you're going to talk about.
Yep.
So guesting is a great way. And I have made so many great connections. I've guested and then been referred to someone else. I've guested and then we've collaborated. We meet each other on other podcasts or other panels. So guesting is really great, but you have to be strategic. You have to realize you have no control over when this episode will come out and how it will be edited. So when you're sharing your info, you got to share one link consistently that's evergreen, that's always going to be there. You're not giving dates. You're not, doing these things so that this content is right for you and is able to be used at any given time whenever it comes out. But you also need to use it when it comes out.
Speaking of which, I was thinking that this episode was going to come out before, but it's not going to come out until after. So last week was Podcast-thon, which is, in my opinion, do you know what Podcast-thon is?
Yes, I've done it.
In my opinion, Podcast-thon is the ultimate in podcast collaboration. It is a week where podcasts around the globe choose their charity of choice to highlight in a podcast episode. And every single podcast does it in a different way. Last week, I happened to interview someone from the Susan G. Komen Foundation, right? Because that is a charity that's near and dear to my heart. Breast cancer survivor for over 12 years, right? 14 years. I don't know how long it's been. A long time, right? I've been in treatment for a long time. But so the reason why I'm sharing this is collaboration. I predict that collaboration is the future, which means that you don't have to launch your own podcast to make a huge impact in the world.
Yep.
Right now, YouTube has collaboration. If you have a YouTube channel and you are a guest on, how many podcasts were you a guest on last year?
Like 28.
And every single, if all 28 of those podcasts also stream the show to YouTube, you can create a playlist on your podcast, on your YouTube channel, and there you have it, your podcast. That's your podcast, right?
And I do have a playlist called Julie's Guest Episodes. And every time one comes out that I know there's a video on YouTube, I go in and grab the link and add it to my playlist. And if I'm posting my episodes with Kandas as a guest, I, tag her channel in mine. And all of that is reciprocal energy and algorithm stuff. And, YouTube makes it very easy to do that. A lot easier than having to remember to tag people in Instagram and Facebook and all of that. And so, I know people that being a guest is enough and it works for them and it works well for them.
It's not just YouTube. You can do playlists on Spotify too and Good Pods. And there's all sorts of, you can't do playlists on Apple, can you? I don't really use Apple.
I think you can now. Somebody told me that recently. But, we don't all hang out in all the apps. But it's a good thing you mentioned. Good Pods is one that I haven't been on there a lot lately. But it was one with my pet one. I hung out there enough and posted enough that every month, you're number one in cat podcasts. You're number one in this. And does it mean a lot? Because I don't know how many pet podcasts are on Good Pods actively. It does but it gives me something to say. It gives me stature. Listen notes. I love to be able to tell people that the story of my pet is a top 5% podcast. I know it is low downloads for that kind of a moniker, but it means something because that shows it's been out consistent enough that it still grows even when I go months without putting a new episode out. And that works for me for that. But for a lot of people who are on that podcast, all they needed to do was guest. And their rescue got follows or the topic they talked about, somebody learned and decided to foster instead of buying, right?
And those stories mean more. They really do. So, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I don't know. I don't know what I was going to say. But what I was going to say is this. I think my pet podcast is a great example of people being guests and helping their cause, helping their business. One of the people who became a sponsor for me last year for the pet podcast was someone who I interviewed the first year of that podcast, who I didn't know at all, who reached out. And then 2 years later, when I'm asking for sponsors, she's like, I'd love to be a sponsor because she has a CBD company specifically for animals and it's very hard to market it. And so I did host read ads for her and it gets put on all my episodes for the amount of time she's, being a sponsor. And that's visibility that she can't get on social media, right?
Yeah.
She's targeting pet people who are hearing not only can your cats or dog have CBD, but she makes pellets for horses and pigs and goats. And so what I have learned is you don't always see what's going to happen, but being a guest, being a sponsor, those things can move the needle for a small business. And so I always say try those first before you get into having your own podcast, because that could be enough, but it can also give you a sense of how podcasting works. And if it's something you want to get more involved with.
Another tool for people who don't want to host their own show but want to use podcasting as a strategy is Podchaser. Do you know about Podchaser?
I've heard the name, but it's not something I've used.
Okay. So what Podchaser does is it is, and I'll link to the Podchaser page for this show in the show notes. Oh, speaking
Yay,
of
we have a
cats,
friend visiting us.
speaking of cats, that is Nyx, Goddess Nyx, Forged from Chaos. So Podchaser is this brilliant website where you can list all of the guests who come on your show. And if you are a guest, you can go to the show and add yourself as a guest on the show. And so in the end, as a guest, you have this resource that you can send people to, and you can say, here is a list of all the shows I've been a guest on. And you're borrowing other people's authority because you're showing that you were a guest on their show. But also, as a host, you're borrowing the authority of your guests, because when somebody who's famous shows up on your guest list, that gives you, some street cred. So Podchaser is a great tool. Go ahead.
That's great. And I think maybe I have used it before. Now that you were explaining it, it's just, I think we have so many tools. Sometimes we use them and forget about them. But yeah, I mean, because what I do is not only do I have a playlist on YouTube, I have a page on my website that is only podcast guesting, and I add everybody's episodes to the bottom of it. And it also is good for me because then I have reference. I can easily find the links, but you can also take the content. I use a tool called Capsho, which is AI for podcasters. I can take the link from YouTube of an episode I was a guest on, put it in Capsho, and Capsho uses what I said in that to create social posts and blog posts and all these things. So even as a guest, you can take your episode, and good hosts are going to give you clips, are going to give you images. You can post those, you can put them in emails, websites, you can create articles on LinkedIn. So yes, you can do so much as a guest that I don't think people always use to the fullest.
Oh. And it's your voice, it's your words.
Yep.
You could put put those episodes, if they're YouTube videos, you can put those episodes in a Notebook LM, and we've talked audience. Notebook LM is by Google. It's a great tool. I think I have a training somewhere that I'll link in the show notes. Anyway, you can put your episodes that you were a guest on in Notebook LM, and then say, find everything I've ever said about pigs as pets. And and it's going to extract every episode that you ever talked about pigs as pets. And you'll be able to use that to repurpose in some way that you can come up with a million ways to reuse that, right?
But I also want to go to what you were saying about hosts. And so if having a podcast is something you really want because you do have a story to tell, you want to share parts of you that you feel like you can't share as a guest, you want to have more control over when the content comes out and what it looks like, that's when we get into podcasting. We're like, okay, hosting may be more for you because you don't like the lack of control as a guest. It's still a good tool. And every host should be guesting, period, because that's just how you grow in multiple ways. But as a host, what we're saying is guests are important, because when you're just starting out and a person who is well known comes on your podcast, that gives you and your podcast credibility. Mm-hmm. But you're also getting to tap into each other's communities, right? I'm being introduced to Kandas's community by being a guest, but I also get to share this and show my community who Kandas is and why you should be listening to her podcast. Mm-hmm. And so the credibility goes both ways. And even if your podcast is really purposeful in growing your business, great, put more of yourself on it, but you still need the guests. You need the guests to grow. You need the guests to build credibility and to show expertise as an interviewer. You can use the tool in a lot of ways, but guests are also important because it expands your network.
And just touch on collaboration again for a minute. I play video games, and in order to learn how to play video games, sometimes I need to watch a YouTube tutorial. And the content creators who create content around video games do collaboration brilliantly. Something I would like to see more podcasters do. And Julie, we can, I think you and I are going to be doing a panel with Amy, several, so maybe we'll figure out a way how to do this. Something I wish the podcasters did more that video game content creators do brilliantly are these collabs where Julie comes on my show and we talk about a subject, and then we go on Julie's show and we talk about an adjacent subject, and then we cross promote both of those episodes on the shows. And so when you watch the first episode, then you automatically want to go to the next episode. Podcasters need to learn how to do that. I think it's coming. I think it's coming.
And I will say I've done that in ways like both with my pet podcast and with my podcast about podcasting. I've had people who I was on theirs and they were on mine. And then what we did was we swapped. And so I gave the interview of them on mine to them, and then they turned it into an additional episode on their own podcast. Like I had someone say, look, I'm done. I don't have any more capacity. Can you just give me this episode? And I'm like, sure, because even if she edits me out, I'm still a part of it. And it's still getting, she's going to mention this is from my interview on this podcast, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that because we're so busy and we're all trying to do all the things, sometimes we miss out on that other level of collaboration that could be amplifying more and could be using that piece of content beyond just the single episode.
And I'm guilty of that because I want to be able to do that. I just haven't ever been able to do it. I don't know if it's something holding me back from, do I really want to just grab an interview that I was on somebody? I mean, because people have given me the files and I'm like, I don't know what to do now. Do I record an intro? How do I do this? So 12 years I've been podcasting and I still don't know everything.
There you go. But I will say, as someone who guested a lot last year, I am guesting this year, but it's not a priority. It was kind of a goal and I wanted to see, could I do this? And I will give a shout out to Podmatch. I use Podmatch a lot as a guest and as a host. But one of the things I realized is when you're doing it a lot, it's hard to keep up with. Mm-hmm. And so I have episodes I may not have even shared. I haven't added in all the places yet. But it did really help me because I get DMs and emails saying, I saw you on so-and-so's podcast. I'd love to talk to you about this. I'm like, it's doing what it needs to do. And it's evergreen. And I know that most of those podcasts I gave my main website. So whatever I'm doing in the moment, my next event is always going to be top of mind because that's the same link I shared everywhere. And even if I talked about my pet podcast, people still look me up and see other stuff I do. So even if it's off topic, it's not because it's just my name and my voice being put out there more. And I've had some really amazing conversations as a guest with people I did not know before I got put on their show, and other things happened. I was on a podcast about for Bruce Springsteen super fans, which I am not that. And somehow I was matched on Podmatch, and the guy said, sure, let's do it. We spoke for an hour and a half. We started talking about podcasting and life changes and all these things that had nothing to do with the podcast. But it happened and it was meant to be and it was fun and it was really great.
Would you please introduce me to him? Because I have a Bruce Springsteen story that I think would be great for his audience.
Yes.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you do it. Okay, so last word. If somebody wants to start a podcast, what are the top 3 things they need to consider?
I want you to be able to answer the question why clearly in 1 or 2 sentences. I want you to go into podcast apps and to listennotes.com and search your topic to see what already exists, what people are doing. And third, I want you to have guested at least twice before you actually agreed to start a podcast. And guesting is going to say, do you like this? How do you do it? What does it look like? How are they doing it? What forms are they using? Like, take note of the process from beginning to post and being released, and then come back to me and say, okay, here's my answers. Am I ready to start a podcast?
And how do people get a hold of you?
You can find all my info, all my podcasts, all the things on my website, juliemarty-pearson.com.
Julie Marty-Pearson, this is your moment of gratitude. For whom or what are you most grateful?
I am most grateful for my body. I am 48 and my body has been through a lot over my life. And sometimes I get mad at how it's held me back, or I think it has. But I've been having a lot of conversations lately around women and women's health and chronic illness. And damn, my body has helped me do a lot. I have a doctorate that took a lot of hard work and years, and we're still paying for, probably will for my rest of my life. But there are times where I get really frustrated in what I can't do or what I'm limited by, or I get tired and I'm hurting. But my body has still carried me through 48 years of a lot of careers and changes and business and podcasting. And so I'm grateful that now my body is in a place where I get to do these things like talk to you on podcasts and talk about women's issues and support women in a lot of different ways. And so when I was thinking about this question, I really realized that I have to be more grateful for what I have been able to do and what I still can do, even if there are limitations.
Thanks for tuning in to Gratitude Geek, the podcast for Gen X women solopreneurs weaving gratitude into your business strategy. Our theme music is by Rev Brock and Soul Lily. I've been your host, Kandas Rodarte. Stay groovy, my friends.
Stay groovy, my friends.